Hello and welcome. We are here for the discussion on statistics in cricket for the International Indian Statistical Association. And I have with me a very distinguished panel, and I'll ask the panelists Srinivas, Bhogle, Rajeeva, Karandikar, and Abhishek Mukherjee to introduce themselves one by one. So let's start with Srinivas.
So I'm Srinivas Bhogle. I stay in Bengaluru. Currently, I'm an honorary scientist at the CSIR Fourth Paradigm Institute. Otherwise, I've done, like the rest of you, I've done my bachelor's and master's. We're essentially alumni of the Indian Statistical Institute. I've been a lifelong cricket enthusiast, and I'd like to believe that I started following cricket earlier than any of the rest of you. Two of you because you're younger, and Rajeev because I don't think he followed too much cricket those days.
So I'm Rajeeva Karandikar. Of late, I've been at Chennai Mathematical Institute, CMI. Earlier, I have had a long stint at ISI, where I studied and was also faculty. And rightly, as Srinivas said, I followed cricket for long, but always on the side a little. Before coming to ISI, also I had followed cricket a little, not much. So, but interest has always been there, and especially interest in interplay with data and numbers and cricket. That interest has always been there.
I am Abhishek. I'm the content head of Western India, and like the others here, I also connected to ISI. I was an ex-student. I passed out in 2000.
I am Arunabha, and I am also an ISI alumni. And currently, I am in Amsterdam, and I am a cricket writer. Plus, I have other jobs as well. So to start our discussion, cricket, it's very, very data rich. Right from the inception of the game, it is a sequence of events, and we can call each ball an event, each delivery an event. And every ball is documented throughout history. Now, however, the process of documentation and degree of information we have on each delivery, that has changed over time, from the start when it was very basic to now where it is very, very sophisticated. So Rajeev, my first question is to you. Could you just elaborate on how this has changed over time and what we see right now?
Yeah. So to the best of my knowledge, Srinivas can correct me. Early on, this was basically all the data was put on one sheet for a match. And per ball, what was the score? That was it. But even getting hold of that information was not easy. We had to rely on whatever a newspaper prints about a match. That was all for the users or interested people also. Okay, maybe, but even the best of the information that the players could get was just this ball, exactly each ball, what was the score, who bowled it and who hit, that's all. There on graphics era and the video content era, whole lot of information is available. Even as users on TV, we see each ball, where was it pitched, how did it go, etc., etc., field placement, all these details, and more may be available for those who are capturing the video. And that has changed the way this whole information is being used over the years. Now the players can use it, the coach can use it, the coach of the bowler can give him an idea about, this batsman is weak on this kind of a ball, that kind of ball. Earlier, it was only word of mouth. Now it is data. So that has tremendously changed the game, I think.
Yes, my question to you, like you have, I know, classified this as innings 1 and innings 2 of data in cricket, right? At a particular time, it became the second innings of data, and we started capturing more. So can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, essentially, well, we talk, one of the earliest memories I have are as a cricket scorer. So we used to have these A-division league matches in Hyderabad, and I would be scoring. And the high point used to be, sometimes ML Jaisimha would peer over your shoulder and just ask for a clarification. But if we look at that old score book, which I think still faithful replica of that remains, what you have there is, that, for example, a batsman like Sachin Tendulkar has hit a boundary, because next to Tendulkar's name, you're going to put a 4 in that score sheet. Likewise, you are watching and that, let's say, he hit the boundary of Anil Kumble. So next to the bowler's name, Anil Kumble, in that score sheet, you'll have a 4. But the key connect, in fact, absolutely the basic connect, that So I know that Kumble got hit for a 4. I know that Tendulkar hit a 4, but the old scoreboard never quite told me that Tendulkar hit Kumble for a 4. So the connect between the bowler and the batsman, essentially coupling the two, happened rather late. I would say it happened, 20, 30 years ago. And in fact, I don't know, but CricWiz, for example, when they sort of started putting together a lot of data, they hired someone to look at the old score sheets and do this matching, ball-to-ball matching. So really for every ball, and after that, whatever Rajeev said goes through, in the sense that, once I know who's the bowler and who's the batsman and what happened. So it's very discreet. There's somebody who's going to come into bowl, there's somebody who's facing, and something happens, delivery after delivery. And we record that. And really what's happening is that the quality of the recording, the amount of information we are recording is a lot richer. So the first innings, if you like, that was your question. See, we are too much in love with records. Who doesn't remember Len Hutton's 364 and then Garfield Sobers gets to 365? Or Freddie Truman was the first to take 307 wickets, and then Lance Gibbs comes and scores, gets a 308 or 309th. I myself was at the Chinnaswamy Stadium when Richard Hadley broke that record of 374 wickets. So we were really a lot in love with who scored how much. Centuries were vitally important. Results, half of them at least or more, were draws. We didn't have ODIs, we didn't have T20s, essentially Test cricket. So, yeah, so, these numbers, as we look back to our childhood days and, we still remember those numbers, but really they were not informative. They were not helpful for any kind of cricket analytics. So that was the first innings. And I believe if you want the transition point where what I call the first innings to second innings, it would be when we decided gathering data in this sort of connected fashion. This bowler bowls to this batsman, and this is what happens.
Yeah, there have been a lot of people who have done a huge amount of work to reconstruct the bowler to batsman.
Yes.
Like Z score, Z stats that we have, Z score. So
essentially, the conventional scorecard doesn't give you which bowlers the batter has hit a 4 off. But if you look at the bowling section of the scorecard,
yes.
So now you know what the first over was. If there was a boundary if the first over was ... 4 ... you know who hit that first 4. And using this method, using the bowler scorecard, you can reconstruct the ball by ball scorecard. So this is something Charles Davis has done. He has managed to get hold of a substantial percentage of every test match, starting with 1877. So he has been reconstructing this, I think, for about a decade or something, maybe more. I'm not sure for how long, but he has been able to reconstruct the databases. So what this gives us is first of all, the balls faced by every batter. That is not something you find in old scorecards.
Right, yes.
So they never recorded the dot balls. But now with using this, we can, so essentially we have strike rates for most batters.
Yeah, most batters, but even now, like, we don't have the strike rate of Tendulkar because there is one test match in Mohali in 1990. I think.
I'm just counting on some amateur scorer in front of Doordarshan who might have kept score of this match.
Yeah.
That is the best bet. I know people who I myself used to do that. When in the 1980s, early 1990s, I myself used to keep score in front of Doordarshan. So yeah, I'm hoping someone has done that. But essentially we can calculate, statistics like which batter has done best against left arm spin. So there are some omissions, some scorecards we don't have, but for many we do have. So this is reconstruction work. The building up of the database process is still on, but since 2000 we have a database for almost every international match, many domestic matches.
Yeah, and previously we used to have this hand-drawn wagon wheels and where people hit the boundaries and where the people took singles and all that. And now we have very, very sophisticated pitch maps and like everything is available to us. That also creates a lot of difference. And when did this start? Can you talk about it? When we had the information about where the ball pitched, each ball pitched, and how much it turned, and how much degree of spin, the data that is available to us today.
Yeah, so essentially, everything, a lot of this comes down to Hawkeye. Because Hawkeye is essential, it can reduce the pitch map. If you collect the Hawkeye data, you can reduce the amount of spin, you can reduce the amount of bounce, everything. I mean, we often hear the term bouncy pitch or a turning wicket, but how much turn, how much bounce? If I think CricViz is using data, either Hawkeye data or data similar to that, but if Hawkeye data is stored somewhere, and using that we can create these databases.
Now, do you think that, my question to Abhishek, and then I'll ask the others as well about this, that do you think teams are actually changing their approach with all this data available, with all the analytics that has been available? Like England, we definitely know that they changed their approach to white ball cricket. They said they will look at the numbers, people laughed at them, and then they really revolutionized their approach to white ball cricket. And similarly, do you think teams are doing that to a great extent?
They used to, the top batters, I mean, not teams, top batters used to look at Ferguson's wagon wheels and everything close to a century ago. So, but yeah, every team these days has an analyst. We often hear of the term matchup. So we see this happen whenever, suppose a batter is weak against leg spin, but he can be outstanding. I mean, they can score very fast against any other kind of bowling. So the opposition knows this, and they save a couple of overs of leg spin. Similarly, the counter strategy also works. They hold back that batter until that leg spinner's quota is over. This is particularly important in T20, where bowlers can be used for 1 over spells. Or say a batter coming at the end of the innings, they may last for about 15 balls, which is 1/8 of the innings, and still, essentially score so much quicker than other 15-ball innings that they may make a difference. So in T20, this is essentially very important. They use this for matchups a lot. And they have been, teams have been doing this without access to data, based on instinct for ages. When we say this player, in India, spinners do better. Away from, I say in England, swing bowlers do better. We know this. We always knew this. Teams always prepared based on these lines, but without exact specifications. These were only broad strategies. Now they're narrowing down the strategies.
Things have come a long way, even in the last 2 decades. Like I remember reading in John Wright's Indian Summers. It starts with his stint at Kent, and he talks about some members of Kent who came to him at the end of the season saying that, "Coach, do you know how many byes we licked on the leg side?" And Wright had no idea, and he writes in a way, or Shardha writes for him, in a way that says that those are really not very necessary. And now, like a reader in the early 2000s would actually say that, yes, the right is actually right. That data is not really necessary that way. But now it is completely different. I mean, people will be quite pulled up for mocking it. Now, Srinivas,
Even a couple of days ago, or maybe yesterday, I was reading an old interview of Ali Bakar. Someone asked Ali Bakar, what difference do you see in captains these days? So Bakar says that they don't keep a fielder at deep third anymore, and then provides a data that every match, this is the number of runs scored through the empty deep third area. So, and this is an old interview. This is not even a recent interview. There are the teams that were keen did work with data a lot, but whatever data was available. But that is not a lot that was not a lot for a long time.
Srinivas, the I come to the modern day. Abhishek talked about T20, and T20, obviously data is very, very important. But about Test cricket, and I'm talking about England here and the recent baseball, the entire phenomena. So do you think this is also something to do with data? And also my question is, do you think this is entirely new approach?
I don't know. I mean, nowadays in cricket media, and of course, we have one of the wisdom people with us here. But the fact is that I think there's too much of a hype. I mean, I agree that baseball, I mean, essentially the last summer, with Brendan McCullum, he sort of, it was almost as if McCullum had no other strategy because England were doing so badly in tests that you might almost imagine that, he had to come up with something new. And given that he's that kind of a batsman, always, I wasn't there, but he hit the first 150 in IPL right here in Bengaluru. So I think McCullum thought that, well, here's a way to go ahead. And I don't think it really worked that much. I still believe that some of the fourth inning victories that England had were because the pitch had, slowed down considerably. But okay, as a strategy, you start hitting, and they're trying it. And now it's become a bit of this thing. You change the captain. I don't think Joe Root would have probably quite agreed for that. Ben Stokes, and now even the match that is going on in Pakistan, 198 for 4 Pakistan today. So they have a decent chance of winning tomorrow. But again, if I ask you, even assuming that they win tomorrow or they lose, you're finishing the test on the 4th day. Sometimes I wonder what's the big hurry.
No, one thing is in the previous test, every test match was getting curtailed by, every day was being curtailed by an hour.
Okay. So effectively, yeah.
So effectively they were losing a day.
They were, at the end of it, they end up losing a day. Yeah, but they're going all out. Now, I'd like to believe that, let's say that, England in June, James Anderson is 30 years old. Okay, no, then we are talking of today, right? Okay, so James Anderson is 40 years old. Are you going to go out and start hitting him from the first ball? And what if you're 3 for 3? KL Rahul,
this is something I just saw some data. So essentially, against the first new ball and the second new ball in the home summer, in the first, essentially England scored at a rate 15% higher outside the first 10 overs with every new ball. So they saw off the first 10 overs and then started to hit. It was not, and the moment they came in Pakistan, the new ball doesn't do as much. They started hitting from the first ball.
Okay, so already the state of the pitch is a variable in this.
Yes. So essentially, they take into. I mean, it is not just hitting from ball one. They are probably assessing things a bit more deeper.
Yeah, but again, if you look at it, they have played Pakistan so far, and they have played New Zealand at home,
India
and an Indian side which should have won that series 3-1.
Yeah.
But so have they really done that against Australia? Have they done that against South Africa in
we will see in the Ashes, I guess. We'll see in the coming Ashes.
Yeah, that is something we'll see in the Ashes. This is going to be
because it's also a pressure issue. I mean, the emotional appeal is the Ashes, right? Mm-hmm. So if an England is 20 for 3 in an Ashes match, the backlash will be much more, and I don't think they can recover.
Yeah, I have a lot of reservations about the extra weightage given to Ashes, but still, that's true.
No, I mean, we could talk about it. I mean, 20 for 3 against Pakistan with Kohli and Rohit back.
Yeah. So Abhishek and I, we wrote a book on Azharuddin and Tendulkar's partnership of 222 at Cape Town. And we wrote it because it was an exceptional partnership, like 222 in 40 overs when you are back to the wall, 5 wickets down. And now it seems that it is the norm. It's then like things have changed so much. That's what we.
So maybe you can say that it was always doable. I mean, if you had that enormous will and a bit of luck, it was always doable. But the way Test cricket is played, you are holding back.
I would rather say it was inspired by the book.
Yeah,
Why not? Why not? Because something that somebody has not even imagined, not only it happens, you see it in a book, and that can change the thinking of the generation.
yeah, I would have believed that if cricketers read a few more books than they do right now.
Doctor,
Yeah,
even
sure.
the Indian win in Brisbane was like
Mhm.
that, right? We
Yeah.
played with a kind of baseball spirit, except that we are Indian, not English.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
mean,
And
even I thought the Indian mindset is, okay, now let's close shop. But they just came coming, and then Washington Sundar hit Cummins for a 6.
I typically do not cite the Brisbane match anywhere because that is I mean, a test match like that we are not going to see ever again in our lifetime.
And I remember in recent times, at a very critical juncture, Rishabh Pant actually scooping the ball over slips for 4.
Yeah, they put together a ship of Theseus kind of team. It was not the team that started. They changed bit by bit, and by the end of the series, it was a different team.
Yeah.
And the last word, traditionally, Australians have always scored fast.
Yes.
I mean, you look back to old records, 300 in a day in Australia was quite common. In days when in India it was below 200. Typically in India, first day it would be 175 for 7 or something like that. Of course, we had 5.5 hours, not 6.
Yeah.
But that was what it used to be. Australia, you always found that you near 300 or plus, even 20 years ago.
Now, also, one thing is 80s, 90s Indian cricket. I mean, that also led to draws. Huh? I mean, think about it. Unless you score quickly, your bowlers will never get enough time to take 20 wickets. And unless that happens, you can never win.
So Rajiv, let me ask you something. That cricket is a sport which is rich, very rich in data. And there are a lot of people who are fascinated with this data and who get a lot of insights. But even then, we see a lot of people who are very, very mistrusting about this data. They don't trust the data whenever it baffles them, or the data shows that it's very different from the worldview they have. They are quite antagonistic towards it. What's the reason for this?
I can't guess somebody's mind, but I think it is partly to do with what happens with data and overall statistical ideas and statistical data that people have. I put it like that, everybody has their belief as their null hypothesis. Okay. If the data supports it, it is great. As soon as it deviates, then they say something is wrong in rather than changing their hypothesis or their belief, they say something is wrong with data. This happens in various domains. And I think cricket this is what it is. So mistrust in statistics, then they'll start saying lies, damn lies, and statistics. Haven't you read that book, and so on and so forth. So I think partly it is that. Partly, I think occasionally I also mistrust the data, and it's not because of that feeling, lies, damn lies, and statistics. It is because it is not the data generation and various formulae being used and are all closed. They are not open. Starting with Duckworth-Lewis, it started with that, and it took time for it to get into open, and even then all kinds of issues that you can't have a software which will show that this is the Duckworth-Lewis thing you have, etc., etc. That is one. But let's come to this even recent DRS. Okay, there's appeal, and they show how the trajectory of the ball, and now even the third umpires are seeing it along with the users. What is the trajectory? And it has no choice really. Third umpire, whatever this DRS is going to give, that has to be the verdict. How can that is at best a guess, right? I mean, it's an output of a model. Who has validated that model, right? I mean, I don't trust it, because there is a simple thing like back testing. At least that much should be done. But the way it is that somebody gets the contract, they buy it from somebody, and then everybody has to believe that. That has to change.
No, DRS also, the other thing is you see it on the screen in a graphical way. So the person, like the common person, is seeing that there was where the ball pitched and this was going to hit the wicket, and they even say umpire's choice, if it is just clipping the bail and all that. But what actually goes on is a series of probabilities, like what was the probability of it hitting. So if we didn't show the graphic and we just showed the numbers, then it would have been even more distrusted by the general public, right?
So
No, they
essentially,
need not show, no. My point is they need not show it on screen. But has anybody even bothered to have these probabilities? Let the third umpire have the probabilities. No, I don't think they even generate. They just show this is the truth, the absolute truth, nothing but the truth. That's how it is.
Yeah.
And that has to be challenged. That's what I feel. That openness in. I mean, let there be a contest. Let others come up with other models. See that this is better. That is
yes,
better. That's
yes. So essentially, what also needs clarity is what is the DRS is based on data. So what is this data?
Yeah.
Is this the data from the same match? If yes, where did they get the data, pitch, turn, bounce, anything for the first ball of the match? For the first ball of that match. So if it's old data from old matches on the same ground, what if it's the first match on the ground? So how do they get these data? That's something that has always made me curious.
So let me just 1 minute say what did I mean by backtesting, and this is done a lot in the finance world. Like if somebody says my model is better, what they will do is, if I was using this model last 3 years, would I have saved some money? Okay. So likewise, here cricket, you have the data, you apply that to models where let's say the balls which the batsman did not hit and they went back. Either they got out or they went to the stump. So uninterrupted the ball went. You take the data up to the point that it was in the popping crease and now predict and see what happened. I mean, doodh ka doodh, pani ka pani, ho jayega. But they would not do it, and that should be done. Then I think then we can all come out and say, no, trust it. This is it. But without that, how can we even say that this is it?
We touched upon some of the reasons why people don't believe in data so much, or data or statistics, and most often people can't make a distinction between the two. Srinivas, there are a lot of things that we have discussed in the past, especially conditional probability, which comes up. And the human brain is not really geared towards understanding conditional probability in a big way. And that gives rise to a lot of like misunderstandings or mistrust, doubts. So can you cite some examples of that?
Let me cite your own example, an example that I picked up from you. Either you created it yourself or anyway. See, if you go back to, very often the belief or the argument or the charge is that whenever India needs Sachin Tendulkar is not there for India. When India is in trouble, Sachin Tendulkar fails. Now, that is a hypothesis. And as usual, even those days, and now with more social media, everyone likes this kind of a hypothesis, where you can run down a good man. So, and this is old. Even in the good old days of Gavaskar-Vishwanath debates, we said the same thing about Gavaskar and Vishwanath. We said Gavaskar would draw it for you, Vishwanath would win it for you. So today, again, people keep saying that, when India needs Sachin, or he fails. In other words, when there is a crisis, Sachin fails. Now, really, if you know anything about Bayes' theorem, it is often the reason. In fact, the real reason is that there is a crisis because Sachin failed. Mm-hmm. It's not that he fails in a crisis, it's that the crisis happens because Sachin failed. Make some reasonable assumptions about what is the chance of winning, failing, Sachin failing. I mean, classic, old-fashioned base stuff. And you can show that really the case in most often is that Sachin doesn't let down India. It's just that he doesn't do badly when India is doing badly. India does badly because Sachin does badly.
Yeah, so on the screen, I'm showing now the probability of Sachin failing in a crisis, which is related to the probability of there being a crisis when Sachin fails, and it's a complicated expression, like the Bayes expansion. Now, this is very difficult to understand intuitively, and that's why people generally translate failing in a crisis. They equate it with crisis because he failed. And to explain this heuristically, it's like if Tendulkar bats for an hour, there is no longer a crisis. So people forget that there was a crisis when he came in. It was 27 for 2 when he came in. Okay. And so they equate that Tendulkar was out and India went into a crisis, which tended to happen when he was the best batsman of this team. And that's what they remember, that there was the crisis and he was out. So that's the equation that people tend to make, forgetting the rest of it, that there were several such moments of crisis when he like succeeded and there was no crisis anymore. So this forgetting the base, there is always a problem. But this is a complicated, intuitively complicated example. But even when someone says that this particular person did not really fare that well in this country, it's just basic average long division or short division. And there also a lot of mistrust comes in. So people trip on long division as well, rather than conditional
there's
probability.
more problem with conditional probability.
Yeah.
Conditional probability, there is even a bigger crisis that forget data and forget common men. Even all statisticians may not agree in a given scenario as to what should be conditional probability. I've written about it, and a crisis happened in an entrance test in ISI where I was still a PhD student, and while deciding, how to give marks, amongst the people who were present there, about 25 of us who were supposed to grade. There was a big argument about which of the two. I don't want to talk about it now, but what I'm saying is that there can be difference of opinion in a given scenario. It all depends on how you are interpreting the conditioning event. What do you interpret as, and whether it was as a answer to a question. What was the question? Is it important? Is it not important? There are lots of issues. So conditional probability is a tricky business, and it's not just commoner. It can be differences even between amongst.
But recently, like here, you are person is confusing between crisis when someone fails and there is a crisis. But even what happens sometimes is he averaged this much, so he is not really good in that particular environment. That becomes no, he is good. He is my hero, so that average is good. So that sort of inversion also happens. So even I have heard a 19, like Gavaskar averaged 19 in Australia when Lilly was bowling. So no, 19 is a good average when those conditions are like that. So that also is something that we hear. But even when people come to terms with using batting average because it has been used for a long time, then you face the other crisis, the other problem, not a crisis really, the other problem that evaluation also changes when the format changes, like T20. When you talk about T20, it is a different ball game, and then average is not that important, but the common man still feel that he has a brilliant average there. So why are you saying that he is not really performing? And commentators also have a great deal of inertia coming out of this average mode. So elaborate on that, Abhishek, maybe.
So essentially, we see, since data was being kept, say, about 250 years ago, first class match was 1772, I think. So I can consider that the starting point. I mean, batting average could be calculated from that era. So since then, there's been no other parameter, because essentially all you had was innings, not outs and runs. And that got aggregated in the annual almanacs and monthly magazines, and everywhere you would see batting average. If someone's batting average is great, that person is a great batter. That is fine. But now when another resource came to being, balls faced, so then the scenario began to change, and then balls faced began to be calculated and strike rate became more important. Now, as Srinivas and Rajeeva both know, that in T20, I mean, both of you have written about this. So in T20, the overs, the balls run out much quicker than wickets. So why are we still stuck on the same parameters? We have inherited the we have inherited test crickets and ODI cricketers. We have inherited the laws, but that does not mean that we also have to inherit what used to be the traditional parameters to define greatness. In T20 cricket, if a batter if a batter averages 50 and at a strike rate of say 125, that is a 40 ball 50 in every innings. That is a bad innings. That person is definitely not a great batter. So, and but this is in ODIs. What happens is if you if someone averages 40 and at a strike rate of say 90, and someone averages 45 at a strike rate of 85, they are sort of similar. I won't get into which one is better and why, but sort of similar. In T20s, it does not happen like that. A 40-130 player is definitely superior to a 50-125 player. There's no doubt about that. Batting average needs to be stopped, taken as seriously as it is at this point. Of course, there has to be some value. We can't ignore, I mean, we can't take seriously batting averages, say single-digit batting averages. But see, it's essentially in a side, 7 people can bat. So on an average, that is 17 balls per batter. If someone bats 20 innings, they have batted more than the average innings. My average expected innings. If someone bats 25, that's a long innings. That's a really long innings. And no one scores about 40 while batting for 20-25 balls. I mean, the whole concept of batting average changes. And the whole concept of superiority of batting average as a parameter changes. And that is something we need to address.
Yeah. So what we see is that when there are 2 parameters, you have to divide one by the other. It is quite simple intuitively. So average is simple. Strike rate on its own is simple. But when they become like 3 parameters together, it is quite a complicated thing for like most people to follow. So similarly, like we have Srinivas and Rajeeva here, so we can ask about Duckworth-Lewis. Like it was the same problem. Like there was overs and runs previously. If somebody scores 250 in 50 overs, then it rains. The next like team was supposed to score 126 in 25 overs and they would win. And then like instead of just dividing by the number of overs, the third parameter came into the equation, and that results in such a lot of distrust because it is not intuitively quite like accessible to most people. So could you elaborate on that? Like the 2 of you, anyone who wants to go?
Yes, first, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so this is an ongoing story in some sense. And, in the early days, even let's say, 275 was considered a good score. So, what has happened is that, of course, bats are also getting better. We mustn't forget the fact that bats are getting better. So, okay, it was ridiculous that we should only have the over rate because, as you say, if you can hit 250 in 50 overs, it's not the same thing as hitting 125 in 25 overs because you still have 10 batsmen at your disposal. So for some time, people tried the trick of saying, okay, let's half the batsmen as well. But halving a batsman is not easy at all. You can't talk of 5 batsmen and invariably it'll be 5.2, 5.3, and then people will fiddle with the batting order. So it's not feasible. So now how do you make sure that it is clearly a disadvantage? I mean, that is why one of the wiliest captains of those days, Arunabha, he would come out to toss and he would look at the sky. And every time he sees a cloud, he says, I'm going to bat second. So that wasn't good. So then in 1992, when we had the World Cup in Australia, the one that Imran Khan won for Pakistan, there what they decided was Richie Benaud. He came up with what he calls the most productive overs. Now the idea there is, okay, let's say that I bat first and I hit 270 in my 50 overs. And between the innings, let's say that there is a loss, there is a curtailment. And now we can only play, say, 38 overs. Now the old rule would have been, you score 270, 38 divided by 50, whatever is that will be your target. But that, in some sense, was giving you the advantage of 10 batsmen in 38 versus 10 batsmen in 50. So it had to be a little higher. So what they came up with is, they came up with the idea of what they call the most productive overs. So they said, all right, so you batted 50 overs, but there exist some 38 overs where you batted the best. So if you think of, you can think of it as the Manhattan, as they just in arranging on, you have x-axis is the overs, y-axis is the runs, and you have the bar charts. So you essentially make them descending bar charts. And then you say that if you got 38 overs, okay, knock off the last 12. So then the argument is that there exists some 38 overs when the first side scored that many runs. So you got to match that. In principle, if the break happens during transition, when between innings, if there's a failure, that is okay. The fun starts and the disaster starts when, these things happen during the second innings. In 1992, I remember we lost a match by 1 run, to Australia or something like that, and there were other horrible results. So then what do you do about it? So that is when you realize that this most productive over is not going to flop. And fortunately, it flopped in a big way, because South Africa needing 22 in 13 balls to win that match, and 2 overs were lost. So now it is okay. I think they gained 1 run. So 21 in whatever it was, 1 ball.
One ball.
Which was impossible. Which was impossible. Of course, there was another evil parameter, that is the TV rights. Essentially, Australian TV said that the match has to end at this time. So otherwise, if the light is good or if you got lights, you could have played out the rest. But that killed off the most productive overs method. And that's when Duckworth-Lewis came in. And now Duckworth-Lewis, well, they argued very rationally. They said, we've got to think of it like you've got 2 resources. How can you win? You can win if you have a lot of balls to hit runs, or you can win if you have a lot of wickets to play with. So that made perfect sense. And obviously you recognize that, so there is a kind of a relationship between these two. So these two are 2 resources, and you want to plot it and so on. So you need a function that will sort of integrate those 2 resources into 1 resource. And that's essentially what Duckworth-Lewis did. So on the y-axis, you've got the balls, or essentially how many balls remaining, and on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, you've essentially got what you call the resource. So you start off at the beginning of the innings because you got all 50 overs and you got all 10 wickets. So your resource is 100. As soon as the first ball is bowled, you lost 1 ball. So a little bit of the resource depletes. And so similarly, you have that depleting resource scenario. And the whole crux therefore was at how should they deplete? And the difficulty that Duckworth-Lewis had, which they never quite talked enough, was you need also not just a wicket depleting model that you can look at averages. You look at old records and say this was that, and on the average, when 6 wickets are lost, this is the score and so on. But what about the fall of wicket? The fall of wicket model was never sort of seamlessly integrated into the Duckworth-Lewis method. They did something arbitrary. And Jayadevan came along and he had his own arbitrary fall of wickets model. And then they found holes in it because they said it is not, it has to be what you call consistent. Consistency really means that if 1 ball has been bowled, some resource has to drop. You can't have a situation where the resource doesn't drop at all. Mm-hmm. And ideally, you want a smooth curve so that the drop of the resource is very smooth and so on. So Duckworth-Lewis came up with their average, which worked pretty well, especially if there are interruptions in the second innings. But if there were interruptions in the first innings, they got into trouble. Let's say I'm batting first, I'm 200 for 2, and 40 overs done, rain. Now the other side is also going to get 40 overs. Now, should they score 201 to win? Jeffrey Boycott thought so. He called it rubbish that you should score anything more than 201. But the fact is you have 40 overs. So your whole strategy of batting with 10 wickets to be exploited in 40 overs versus 50 overs means you will score faster. And now we're seeing the story, so glaringly in T20s. More wickets, your rate is higher. More wickets, higher strike rate. So it can't be 201. What do? You reduce the overs. You don't want to reduce the overs. Playing public is paying money for that. Only thing you can do is to increase the number of runs that they have to score. And there, I won't get into too much, but essentially, in the first inning, they were projecting upwards and then trying to bring it down. And that was giving them pretty absurd results. And that is why if you look at the early Duckworth-Lewis, it would be very nice to have a ratio, right? You have this first team score, multiplied by the relative ratios of the resources. That would be fine. But what happens is that because it's a multiplicative model, it suffers. So that is why Duckworth-Lewis came up with what they call the G50 model, R2 minus R1 multiplied by the average score. So it was clumsy. Duckworth-Lewis never quite agreed that it was clumsy. But we had, 2003, I'm going to stop, but 2003, when India was chasing Australia's 359 for 2. Mm-hmm. And at one stage, Tendulkar got out early, but Sehwag was going guns. And at one stage, it looked cloudy. And those days, I think it was 20 or 25. Once those many overs are bowled, we have a result. Yeah. You had a situation where in the next 9 balls, without losing a wicket, if India had not lost a wicket and scored 13 runs, and then it had started raining, India would have won the World Cup. So in 2003, you would have had a scenario exactly like 1992. Well, unfortunately, it didn't rain. And also, unfortunately, more Sehwag got out. So the whole story changed, but Duckworth-Lewis got a fright. And if that had happened, it would have. So what did Duckworth-Lewis do? They fiddled with their curves. We have no pictures, I can't talk about it. But essentially what they call the professional edition, what they did is, what do you do? Because if first teams are scoring very high, then the only thing you can do is that you can go back to the default. Okay, I can't really explain too much. But let me say the following. that Duckworth-Lewis, when they were very high first inning scores, or when there were interruptions in the first innings, it didn't quite perform well. Performed pretty well, very well actually, even interruptions were in the second innings. And it all boils down to that shape of the curve. Essentially, it has to be going down, but at the beginning, it is very sluggish. It doesn't want to fall. And in the end, it probably wants to fall too fast. So it's really the shape of the curve that determines these things. And okay, but today I think we're in a situation where again, Stern has come in and basically he's just done that. He's played with the shapes and ensured that, and he makes sure still that, so I would say today that Duckworth-Lewis for ODIs works now.
Just a question.
Yeah.
I don't know the details, but do they still assume that every batter is equal, number one, irrespective of batting position?
Well, essentially,
it's just a wicket, right?
Yeah.
No, first 6 give a higher weightage.
Okay.
So that is what I talked about, the fall of wicket model.
Yeah.
That comes in the fall of wicket model. So the first 6 wickets, Duckworth-Lewis tended to, and that is why what happened was the Duckworth-Lewis curve initially, if you had a lot of wickets in hand, your resource didn't fall. So let's say at the halfway stage, you have a lot of wickets in hand, 25 overs gone. So you would think that you have to score half the runs, but Duckworth-Lewis would say that you've still got 70% of the resource, which means you have effectively used only 30% of your resource, which means you have all the remaining resource to score, which is why in that model, even if you're 100 for no loss chasing 300, you win. 100 for no loss in 25 overs, chasing 300, you win. That was because it was lopsided. The weightage for the wickets in the early was too much. And in the end, basically, nobody going. Finally, they all have to sink. I mean, you can agree that, when 3 balls are remaining, wicket loss, the only damage is that you lose a ball. You get a dot ball. But other than that, there isn't a problem. But Duckworth-Lewis for this thing is fine. For T20, and increasingly, one thing that has become clear in the last year or two is that ODIs and tests are sort of, they are partners. Yeah. So calling it white ball and red ball makes no sense. I mean, I wish we had Virat Kohli as our captain in Bangladesh, actually. So, what was happening there was you have a white ball this thing. And then what do you do with 20 overs? And so here is a great Duckworth-Lewis, deception, I would call it nothing less than that. They just say that a T20 match is nothing but an ODI match with the first 30 overs lost.
That was the absurd thing.
Yeah. So Rajeev, maybe you want to go on from there.
So Srinivas and I had written about it, and it was a very nice example that, the son wants a trouser and the father, they don't want to spend more money. So they just cut the father's trouser half bottom, and think about it, the top half is gone and only the bottom half is gone and top half is the trouser for the son. That will be the most absurd. And we suggested that, with
shrinking
you use a washing machine and shrink the thing a few times, and that will be much better than cutting half. So to begin with, they should have done something like that, rather than thinking that T20 is last 20 overs of a match. It just didn't make sense.
And we have seen enough IPL, and we know that, when the pitch is slow, when the ball is not coming up to the bat, even Dhoni can't hit sixes. Dhoni in 2016, if he can't hit sixes when the ball is not coming, you look at Firozshah Kotla pitch, or you look at the chip-up, the ball doesn't come up. So you recognize that if the ball doesn't come up, it's a completely different game. So the state of the pitch has to intervene. Even assuming there's no rain, the state of the pitch. And people realize it. That is why in the early overs with the hard ball, they try to hit. All those are strategies. But really, the rule has to change. It has to be, I believe it has to be a kind of a machine learning model. And
so alternately, they started a new tournament in the West Indies this year. It's a 10-over tournament, but the thing is, it's called 660 or something. They spell it 6 and then IXTY. So there you can lose 6 wickets and then you're bowled out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So essentially they're reducing the other resource.
See, that is the story, right? In Test cricket, wickets are paramount. In ODI, they are important. Here, they are much less important. And that is what the argument you made about strike rate being more important. But one last thing I want to say is that, innings, let's say I agree that Virat Kohli is, after 40 balls, he scored 40. It's very bad because he's used up 1/3 of the innings and just contributed 40. And you're hoping for a par score of 160 at least. So the remaining guys have to score 120, which is tough. But the ability to accelerate, the ability for a set batsman and a stylish and classical good batsman to accelerate is enormous. You see what kind of, the play that we still have. I mean, even in 20 overs, if you hit, you can score 1,200 runs.
Yeah.
720, sorry, not
720.
720. You've got 720. 720 is a lot. And that is why we see, I mean, on a good pitch, 24, 25 overs, 25 runs in the last is doable. I mean, just the other day, Rohit Sharma, he almost pulled it off.
Yeah. So essentially what you bring into that is how frequently does the batter get out after reaching that mark? When that batter accelerates,
and there, in some sense, if he has a high average, I will infer from that he's a better batsman. I mean, you can question that inference, but if he has a significantly higher average, he's a better batsman, and therefore I believe that he has the ability to accelerate. What is your ability to accelerate? We are talking of strike rates. That's wonderful, but you have to go and you have to have a metric for each person. What is his? It's 5 dot balls before he can hit a single run. So that is a latency issue, and the other is an acceleration issue. So really, a metric has to bring in low latency, high acceleration.
Yes.
And we are not doing that. Yeah.
So essentially, when you say low latency, high acceleration, essentially it comes down to batters who can hit without being set.
Sky. Go for the sky.
So essentially, I'm looking at a future. We are looking at a future where batters will get set by practicing against knockdowns next to the dugouts.
Yeah, and
there is the emotional aspect. When you're 5 wickets down, if Virat Kohli is at the other end, you feel, or in India, because we don't have all-rounders. So if you want to pack 4 bowlers at the end, by the time number 8 comes, the established batsman has to protect him.
Yeah.
So essentially, what the BCCI is trying is they're calling it the intent player or some other term.
Yeah, the impact player. They're calling it the impact player.
Impact player. So essentially, it's a super sub.
It is essentially a super sub,
and that will take the all-rounder out of the equation even more.
And that's because India lacks all-rounders, so it makes a lot of sense for India to adapt that model.
Yeah. So, but again, if India can get that model implemented across ICC, then of course the lack of all-rounders may not matter.
You can ask a philosophical question. I mean, do you want to see great bowlers and great batsmen, or just above average all-rounders?
Yeah, essentially it comes to that.
Yeah. We are still waiting for the ideal rate rule for T20.
But it can be done, right? I mean, basically recalculate based on how differently teams run out of balls.
Can be done, but Duckworth-Lewis expects a smooth, beautiful mathematical model. You're not going to get that. You're going to get a stochastic.
I know. I can vaguely think of it, but yeah.
One thing about Duckworth-Lewis, we never quite got the numbers that worked behind this scene, like the end audience. They never quite understood how it was going and how it was actually changing they saw the par score, but they saw the par score, but other than that, I mean, it was quite a mystery. Suddenly they were given the numbers. So how this formula worked, it was quite a mystery to them. And even now, how this win probability and all these things work, that's quite a mystery. People don't get to see how the numbers are working in the background. And this may be a dampener for somebody who wants to really go deep into it and understand the things. So do you think?
Let me just say, I know Rajeev can answer this better, but the win probability that you're talking about, essentially, if you use a dynamic programming model, Duckworth-Lewis is a mathematical model. You just have an equation and you fit some value. Whereas a dynamic programming model is gathering more moss, if you want to think of it that way. So, and also because it's gathering moss, hopefully it is gathering information about the state of the pitch, state of the match, state of the conditions, and so on. So the winning probability model is based on the couple of New Zealanders who did it. I forget their names, B and somebody. I've written about that, but one of them died, and because they were New Zealanders, nobody backed them. But they had potentially a better model because they were working on dynamic programming. So Rajiv, dynamic programming,
Yeah.
always
So,
better, right?
Yeah, the main thing is with win probability again is whoever has created a model and the broadcaster has decided to use that, that is the ultimate. We don't know where it is coming from. Whereas BCCI or ICC should hold a contest, let people propose, let there be debate and let the best win. That should be
Didn't
the
happen
game.
with
But that is
Dakota.
not
That is
happening.
something I would love to see. That is something I would love to see.
Yeah.
A real contest, right? In fact, Jaydevan asked for that, but ICC doesn't want it. They've got someone, okay, I shouldn't be talking too much, but essentially there should be a contest.
I mean,
And not just that, okay, I don't know if I can come to this. See, I think one of the glaring issues is who controls cricket data, who controls raw cricket data. Look at
because
NPA.
what goes on screen, because that is what people see. Who controls that? That is also equally important.
And I think CricViz is holding on, I mean, CricViz and companies like that, they are holding on to that data. And then they fabricate a lot of metrics and call them insights and so on. Nothing wrong with them. So my view would be that the raw data should be available to every analyst. Now, if you're smart and you come up with sort of more telling matrices, yeah, by all means, sell those matrices. And if people are willing to pay money for them, good for you, good for everyone. But if your metrics depend on controlling the data, then I fear we have a problem.
Yeah.
I asked Hivanish Ganju, who some of our best analysts. I said, where do you get your data from? Sometimes they scrape, I mean, at one point, BCCI had access to, finally, it's as Abhishek said, it's all Hawkeye. Hawkeye data is the richness of data with the coming of Hawkeye, vis-a-vis the old scoreboard. Hawkeye has added a whole dimension to it. The richness
We never think of Hawkeye. We think of Hawkeye as a visual. What if we don't understand the magnitude
amazing
of
information.
Data it controls and has. Yes, absolutely.
Amazing. And now why doesn't the ICC sort of say that we control the Hawkeye data? And maybe you pay a subscription, but analysts should have access to the data. Let somebody, it's an extension of the same problem. Let somebody come with the best metrics and let them win. But it's now done a little bit on the sly. And people say that we invested all that data, so we get the advantage.
No, yeah, I mean, I'm sure there will be analysts who will be willing to pay for that data, but that will also improve cricket analytics. It will improve the quality.
Without a doubt. And what you're talking of matchups today, they are baby problems. What you can do with Hawkeye data is an order of magnitude more. I mean, your matchups are going to be completely different.
Yes.
So it's a fascinating discussion, and I wish that we could go on forever, but we do have to wind up now. So thank you all for joining, and it was a great pleasure. And we will see how data improves with time and what logical next steps are in this cricket statistics world.